The laughter echoed across the Lagos helipad as billionaire CEO Obinna Okoye pointed at the trembling cleaner. "Fly this helicopter," he mocked, "and I'll marry you." Cameras flashed. Guests smirked. Someone whispered, "She can't even afford shoes." But Shani didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply looked at the aircraft, like she remembered it. Then something changed. The wind shifted. The silence grew heavy. And for a brief second, the man who owned everything felt something unfamiliar cheer. Because the woman he had just humiliated was no ordinary cleaner. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? If stories like this move, you don't forget to subscribe. Lagos never really slept. Even before the sun rose, the city was already awake, breathing, moving, surviving. From the distant hum of Danfo buses to the rhythmic clang of roadside vendors setting up their stalls, life pushed forward with quiet urgency. And somewhere within that endless motion, unnoticed by most, Shani Adewale began her day. She arrived at Okoye Air Headquarters before the first executives stepped through the glass doors. The building itself stood like a monument to success, polished marble floors, towering steel frames, and wide windows reflecting the waking city. To the world, it represented power, ambition, and prestige. To Shani, it was simply a place to work and endure. Her uniform was clean, but worn the edges slightly frayed despite her careful stitching. She tied her hair back neatly, her movements precise, almost disciplined in a way that seemed unusual for someone in her position. A small bucket in one hand and a mop in the other, she moved quietly across the lobby, her presence barely acknowledged. Most people never noticed her, and those who did rarely saw more than what they expected. A cleaner, someone invisible, someone replaceable. Make sure the executive floor is spotless. Today, a sharp voice called out behind her. Shani turned slightly. It was Ngozi Balogun, one of the senior administrative officers. Her heels clicked loudly against the floor, her expression permanently set, somewhere between irritation and superiority. "We have investors coming," Ngozi continued, crossing her arms. "Important people, not like—" Her eyes swept over Shani briefly. "This." Shani nodded once. "Yes, ma." No argument, no resistance. Ngozi scoffed lightly and walked away, already distracted by her phone. Shani returned to her work without another word. That was how she survived, by saying less, by becoming smaller, by letting the world underestimate her. But survival came at a cost. After finishing the lobby, she moved toward the elevators, careful not to interfere with the growing stream of employees arriving for the day. Some brushed past her without a glance. Others stepped around her bucket as if avoiding contamination. A few exchanged quiet laughs, their voices low but not low enough. "She's always here before everyone," one young man whispered to his colleague. "Of course," the other replied. "People like her don't have anywhere else to be." Shani heard them. She always did. But her face remained calm, unreadable. Because she had learned something long ago. Pain did not disappear when acknowledged. Sometimes it only grew louder. By mid-morning, the building had transformed. Suits replaced silence. Conversations filled the halls. Laptops clicked open, meetings began, and the air carried the subtle tension of ambition. At the top floor, where glass walls overlooked the entire city, Obinna Okoye stood inside his office. He was young for a man in his position, but there was nothing uncertain about the way he carried himself. Tall, sharply dressed, his presence commanded attention, even in stillness. His navy suit fit perfectly. His watch gleamed under the morning light, and his expression, controlled, distant, revealed very little. He had inherited Okoye Air from his father, a legend in the aviation industry. But inheritance did not guarantee respect, and Obinna knew it. That was why everything had to be perfect. "Are the preparations complete?" he asked without turning. Yes, sir, Ngozi responded from behind him. The helipad event is fully arranged. Investors from Abuja and Accra have confirmed attendance. Obinna nodded slightly. This demonstration must go flawlessly, he said. No mistakes. Ngozi hesitated for a moment. There was a minor issue reported earlier in the maintenance wing. Nothing serious. It has been handled. Obinna's jaw tightened. I don't want handled, he replied calmly. I want certainty. Yes, sir. Outside, Shani continued her routine, unaware of the conversation above, but not unaware of the tension in the air. She could feel it in the hurried footsteps, in the clipped voices, in the way even the cleaners were being watched more closely than usual. Something important was coming, and in places like this, important moments often meant danger for people like her. By midday, she finally stepped outside for a short break. The heat of Lagos wrapped around her, instantly thick and unrelenting. She sat on a low concrete ledge near the back of the building, pulling a small container of food from her bag. It wasn't much, just rice and a bit of stew. But she ate slowly as if stretching the moment. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Auntie Zainab, Shani answered immediately. Auntie Harant's voice was weak but warm. My daughter. Have you eaten? Shani forced a small smile, though no one could see it. Yes, Auntie. I'm eating now. A soft cough came through the line, and Tariq, Shani asked gently. He is at school, Zainab replied. He asked about you this morning. Shani's chest tightened slightly. I'll come by tonight, she said. I'll bring his favorite bread. You are doing too much, her aunt whispered. You carry everything alone. Shani looked down at her hands, strong, steady, but worn. It's okay, she said quietly. We'll be okay. But even as she spoke, something unspoken lingered beneath her words. Because okay had become a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. After the call ended, she sat there for a moment, longer watching the distant skyline. Planes moved faintly across the horizon, their shapes small but unmistakable. Her eyes followed one of them, and for just a second, something shifted in her expression. Not sadness, not longing, something deeper, something remembered. But the moment passed quickly. Shani stood, brushed off her uniform, and returned inside. Work was waiting. Life was waiting. And whatever her past had been, it had no place here. As the afternoon stretched on, the building grew even busier. Staff rushed between departments, last-minute preparations intensified, and the energy surrounding the upcoming event became impossible to ignore. In the maintenance corridor, Shani pushed her cart slowly, her eyes scanning the area as she worked. She paused briefly near an open doorway. Inside, a group of technicians stood around a control panel, their voices tense. Are you sure this is calibrated correctly? One of them asked. It should be, another replied, though his tone lacked confidence. Shani's gaze lingered on the panel. Just for a second. Her brow tightened ever so slightly. Then she looked away and kept walking, because some instincts were too dangerous to follow. Because some knowledge came with consequences. And because in a world that had already taken so much from her, being invisible was the only protection she had left. There were things about Shani that did not fit, not in a way that people could easily explain, and certainly not in a way they cared enough to question. But the signs were there. In the way she walked with quiet precision, never bumping into anything even in the busiest corridors. In the way her eyes instinctively tracked movement, timing, distance, rhythm, like someone trained to read patterns others ignored. And most of all, in the way she listened, not just to words, to systems, to sounds, to silence. On the executive floor, where she had been assigned to clean the glass partitions before the investor event, Shani moved carefully, her cloth gliding across spotless surfaces that barely needed her attention. Outside the windows, Lagos stretched endlessly, alive with motion. But inside everything was controlled temperature-light behavior perception. Perfection was expected here. But perfection, Shani had learned, was often just a performance. Behind one of the glass walls, a strategy meeting was underway. Voices filtered faintly through the sealed space, sharp and measured. "We cannot afford even the smallest technical embarrassment," one executive said. "Our competitors are waiting for a mistake." Obinna's voice followed, calm but firm. "There will be no mistake." Shani did not look directly, but she could sense him. Even without seeing, she recognized the weight his presence carried in a room. People adjusted around him. Their tone shifted. Their confidence either grew or shrank. "Everything has been inspected," Obinna continued. "Yes," Ngozi replied. "All systems cleared." A brief pause. Then quietly, Obinna added, "Good." Shani's hand slowed for just a fraction of a second. Cleared. The word lingered, because she had seen something earlier. Not a failure, not yet, but a small inconsistency in the maintenance corridor, a calibration that didn't align the way it should have. It was subtle, easy to overlook, but not invisible, not to her. She resumed cleaning her face, expressionless, because noticing something and saying something were not the same. And in her world, speaking up had never come without consequence. Downstairs, the atmosphere was beginning to tighten. Staff members moved faster. Conversations shortened. Even laughter sounded forced. The closer the event came, the more fragile the illusion of control became. In the staff break area, a few employees gathered, their voices low but animated. "Did you hear? Some international investors are coming," one woman said. "Yes, from Ghana and South Africa," another added. "Big people. This is Obinna's moment." A third leaned in slightly. "If anything goes wrong today, it will be a disaster for him." Shani stood near the sink, rinsing out her cloth, her back turned to them. "He deserves the pressure," the first woman muttered. "He thinks too highly of himself." "Well, that's what happens when you inherit everything," someone else replied. A quiet chuckle followed. Then after a pause, the tone shifted. Unlike some people, a voice added louder now. "At least he didn't end up cleaning floors." Laughter, soft but deliberate. Shani didn't react. She wrung out the cloth slowly, methodically, as if the words had passed through her without leaving a mark. But inside, something tightened. Not anger, not even hurt. Something older, something she had already survived. Across the building, Obinna stood alone again in his office. The city stretched before him, but he wasn't looking at it. His reflection stared back from the glass, sharp, composed, controlled. Everything had to work. Everything had to prove something. Because beneath the confidence, there was a truth he never spoke aloud. He was still trying to earn a position that had been handed to him. His father had built Okoye Air from nothing, a legend, a name that carried weight across the continent. And Obinna. He carried the expectation, the comparison, the quiet doubt that followed him into every room. That was why failure was not an option. Not today, not ever. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Ngozi stepped inside. "The guests will begin arriving within the hour," she said. "Media is already setting up near the helipad." Obinna nodded. "And the demonstration flight?" he asked. "All preparations are complete." Again that word, complete. Obinna turned slightly, his gaze narrowing. "For your sake," he said calmly. "I hope that is true." Ngozi swallowed subtly. "It is." But something in her tone, just for a second, wavered. And Obinna noticed. Back in the maintenance corridor, Shani passed the same open doorway again. The technicians were gone now. The control panel remained, unattended. She slowed, just slightly. Her eyes moved over the system. The numbers, the alignment, the silent language of machinery. Her breath steadied. Her mind, without permission, began to calculate. It wouldn't take much. A small adjustment, a correction, nothing dramatic, just enough to prevent. She stopped. Her hand tightened around the handle of her cart. No, not her place, not anymore. She forced herself to move. Step by step, she walked past the doorway, past the panel, past the instinct that had once defined her, because that part of her life was gone, buried, or at least, that's what she had told herself. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, the helipad came alive. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance. Security personnel stood at attention. Well-dressed guests stepped out, their laughter and conversation filling the air with a polished ease that came from never having to struggle. Cameras flashed. Names were called. Deals were anticipated. Inside, staff members rushed to maintain the illusion of perfection. And among them, unnoticed as always, Shani moved quietly. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. Because the closer the moment came, the louder the silence in her mind became. The kind of silence that came before something broke. Or something returned. And far above in his glass office, Obinna watched the scene unfold, unaware that the smallest, quietest presence in his building might soon become the one thing he could not control. Evening did not bring rest to Shani. When her shift ended, the city was still loud, still restless, still demanding something from everyone who lived inside it. The sky over Lagos faded into a dim orange, then into a soft, endless gray. Lights flickered on across buildings, streets, and roadside stalls, painting the city in motion rather than calm. Shani walked home through narrow streets where the pavement was uneven and familiar. Vendors were still selling roasted corn. Children chased each other barefoot. Motorbikes passed too close too fast. Life here was not polished like the floors of Okoye Air. It was raw, unfiltered, and honest. She reached a small, aging building tucked between two larger ones. The paint on the walls had long faded, and the staircase creaked with every step. But it was home. Inside, the air was quiet. Auntie Shani called softly as she entered. A weak voice responded from the inner room. "I am here, my daughter." Shani stepped in and found Auntie Zainab lying on a thin mattress, covered with a light wrapper. Her breathing was shallow, her face drawn but still kind. Time had taken much from her body, but not from her warmth. Shani knelt beside her immediately. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. Zainab smiled faintly. "Better now that you are here." Shani reached for her hand. It was warm but fragile. "You need medicine," Shani said quietly. "We need money," Zainab corrected softly. The truth hung in the air between them. Shani didn't respond right away, because they both knew, and neither wanted to say it again. A small voice suddenly echoed from the doorway. Auntie Shani turned. Tariq rushed toward her, his face lighting up instantly. He was small for his age, but his energy filled the room in a way nothing else could. He wrapped his arms tightly around her, holding on as if she were the safest place in the world. "You came late," he said, pulling back to look at her. "I had work," she replied, brushing his hair gently. "But I brought you something." His eyes widened. "Bread." Shani smiled slightly and reached into her bag, handing him the small wrapped loaf. Tariq took it with both hands like it was something precious, not something simple. "Thank you," he said quickly, already sitting down to eat. Shani watched him for a moment, and something inside her softened, because no matter how heavy the world became, this part of her life still mattered, still gave her reason, still gave her strength. Later that night, after Tariq had fallen asleep and Zainab had drifted into a fragile rest, Shani sat alone outside the building. The city had quieted slightly, though it never truly stopped. A faint breeze moved through the air, carrying distant sounds. music engines, voices blending together. She leaned back against the wall, her eyes lifted toward the sky. And for a long time, she said nothing, did nothing, just breathed, because this was the only moment in her day that belonged entirely to her. But even in that silence, the past was never far. It never left. It waited, and sometimes, like tonight, it returned. Not as memory, as feeling. Her fingers tightened slightly against her knees. And then, without warning, a flash. Bright sunlight, the open sky, the hum of an engine, her hands gripping controls. Steady, a deep voice said beside her. Calm, strong, familiar. Her father, Captain Adawale. "You don't fight the air, Shani," he continued. "You listen to it." Her younger self sat beside him, focused, determined, her eyes fixed ahead. "I'm listening," she replied. "Good," he said with quiet pride. "Because one day, you won't need me beside you." The memory shifted, the sky darkened, voices raised, anger, fear. "You don't understand what you're doing," her father shouted at someone unseen. "This is bigger than you," another voice snapped. Then sirens, chaos, a door slamming, and silence. Shani's eyes snapped open. Her breathing was steady, but her chest felt tight, because that was where it always stopped, right before everything changed, right before everything was taken. She closed her eyes again, not to remember more, but to stop remembering at all. The next morning came too quickly. Back at Okoye Air, the atmosphere had shifted again, no longer tense but sharp, focused, controlled. Today was the day, the helipad event. Staff members moved with purpose. Every detail was being checked, adjusted, perfected. There was no room for error, no space for weakness, and certainly no patience for someone like Shani. "Why are you still here?" Ngozi's voice cut through the hallway as Shani stepped into the upper floor. Shani paused. "I was assigned. I know what you were assigned," Ngozi interrupted. "But today is not a normal day. Stay out of sight. Do your work and don't interfere." "Yes, Ma." Ngozi stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. "People like you should understand something," she said. "This place runs on excellence, not sympathy." Shani held her gaze for a brief moment, then nodded once, and walked past her, because she had heard worse, much worse. Outside, the helipad was fully prepared. A sleek helicopter stood at the center, its polished body reflecting the bright Lagos sun. Around it, guests gathered in elegant attire, their conversations filled with confidence and expectation. Cameras were ready. Deals were waiting, reputations were on the line, and above all of it, control, or at least the illusion of it. Shani stood at the edge of the area, holding her cleaning tools, her presence unnoticed among the movement. But her eyes were not on the people. They were on the aircraft. Every detail, every line, every silent signal it carried. Her gaze lingered, not with curiosity, with recognition. And somewhere deep inside her, something long buried began to rise. By mid-morning, the helipad had transformed into a stage. Everything gleamed. White canopies stretched elegantly across one side, offering shade to distinguished guests. Tables were arranged with precision glassware, sparkling under the sun. Chilled drinks lined neatly beside silver trays. A row of luxury cars stood nearby, engines quiet but presence loud. Security guards maintained a controlled perimeter, scanning every movement with professional detachment. This was not just an event. It was a performance of power, and at the center of it all stood the helicopter, sleek, polished, and waiting. Its blades were still, but it seemed alive in its silence, like something that understood the weight of expectation placed upon it. Shani stood at the far edge of the platform, just beyond the main flow of activity. Her uniform set her apart immediately. While others wore tailored suits and elegant dresses, She carried a bucket and cloth, her role clearly defined. Invisible, replaceable, safe. At least that was what everyone believed. Careful with that, a voice snapped as she passed behind one of the serving stations. It was Ngozi again. Her sharp eyes scanned Shani from head to toe before settling on the floor beneath her feet. "If anything here looks out of place, you will be the first to answer for it," she said coldly. Shani lowered her gaze slightly. "Yes, Ma." Ngozi lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for something, an attitude, a reaction, a mistake. But Shani gave her nothing, so Ngozi turned and walked away, heels striking the ground with quiet authority. Shani exhaled slowly, not from fear, from restraint, because she had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than defense. Guests began arriving in waves, men with confident laughter, women with poised elegance. Conversations layered over each other, filled with business politics and subtle competition. Names were exchanged, deals hinted, alliances measured. Near the center, Obinna Okoye moved among them with ease. He smiled when necessary, spoke when required, listened just enough to maintain control. Every gesture was calculated, every word placed carefully. To the outside world, he was exactly what he needed to be. A leader, a success, a man who belonged at the top. "Obinna," a voice called warmly. He turned to see a tall man approaching, dressed in a crisp suit with a confident stride. Kwesi Obinna greeted, extending his hand. "You made it." "Of course," Kwesi replied with a grin. "I wouldn't miss this. I hear you're about to impress us all." Obinna smiled slightly. "That's the plan." They spoke briefly, their conversation, light but meaningful. Around them, others watched, not openly but carefully. Every interaction at this level carried weight. Across the platform, Shani continued her work, wiping surfaces, adjusting small details, moving quietly. But her awareness was sharp. She could feel the rhythm of the environment, the patterns, the shifts, and something wasn't right. Her eyes drifted once more to the helicopter. It stood exactly as it should. Perfect. But perfection, she knew, could be misleading. Her gaze narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, in recognition. There it was again, that subtle misalignment, barely visible, almost insignificant, but not harmless. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand, because she knew what it meant, or at least, what it could become. She looked away, quickly. No, not her place, not her responsibility. That was what she told herself. That was what she had been forced to learn. Because the last time she stepped beyond her place, everything changed. "Hey." The voice was softer this time, not sharp, not mocking. Shani turned slightly. It was Kwame Mensah, the technician. He stood a few steps away, his expression thoughtful, rather than judgmental. "You're working everywhere today," he said casually. Shani nodded. "There's a lot to prepare." Kwame glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You were near the maintenance corridor yesterday, right?" Shani paused for a fraction of a second. "Yes." Kwame studied her face. "I heard someone adjusted a setting that prevented a bigger issue," he said. "No one is taking credit for it." Shani's expression didn't change. "I don't know anything about that," she replied quietly. Kwame didn't respond immediately, because he didn't believe her, not fully. But he also didn't push. "All right," he said after a moment. "Just be careful today." Shani gave a small nod. Kwame walked away, but his thoughts stayed behind. Because the more he observed her, the less she made sense, and the more he felt that whatever truth she was hiding, it wasn't small. The event continued smoothly. Speeches began. Introductions were made. Applause rose and fell like a controlled wave. Obinna stepped forward at the right moment, his voice steady, his presence commanding. "Today marks a new chapter for Okoye Air," he said, addressing the crowd. "A step forward in innovation, in trust, and in our commitment to excellence." The audience listened, some impressed, some calculating, some waiting for proof. Behind them, the helicopter remained still, waiting. Then a small disturbance. Nothing dramatic, just a moment. A technician whispered to another. A brief glance exchanged, a subtle shift in posture. Shani noticed, because she always noticed. Her eyes moved instantly toward the aircraft. The misalignment, still there, unchanged, uncorrected. Her breath slowed, because now it wasn't just a possibility. It was a risk, and risks didn't stay small forever. She looked toward the technicians. They were distracted, focused on something else, unaware, or too confident to see. Her mind moved quickly, calculating, timing, outcome, and for a brief moment, the past and present collided, because this was familiar, too familiar. Her hand tightened slightly, then relaxed. No. She stepped back, further into the background, because she had made a decision, long ago, to survive, to stay unseen, to never step forward again, even if she could, even if she should. At the center of the platform, Obinna concluded his speech. Applause followed, strong, confident, expected. He turned, slightly gesturing toward the helicopter, and now he said, "We demonstrate not just our vision, but our capability." The crowd shifted, attention sharpening, cameras lifted, eyes focused. Everything was aligning, everything was ready. Except, not everything was right, and somewhere behind the perfect image, a quiet truth remained. Unnoticed, unspoken, waiting. Shani stood still at the edge of it all, her presence small, her silence deep. But inside her, the noise had begun, because she knew something no one else did. And the longer she stayed quiet, the closer everything moved, toward a moment that could not be undone. The applause had barely settled when the tension began to shift. It was subtle at first. A technician near the helicopter leaned closer to another, whispering something too quickly. A clipboard changed hands. A glance, sharp, uncertain, passed between two men who had been confident just moments ago. To the guests, nothing seemed wrong. The music still played softly in the background. Drinks were still being served. Conversations resumed with polite laughter. But beneath that surface, something had slipped. Shani felt it before she fully saw it, because her attention had never left the aircraft. Her eyes traced the same point again, the same barely noticeable inconsistency she had seen earlier. The alignment was off by a fraction. To an untrained eye, it meant nothing. To her, it meant risk, not immediate disaster, but not safe either. Her breathing slowed, her thoughts sharpening. It would affect stability, not drastically at first, but enough to become something else, under pressure. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand. This was the moment, the exact kind of moment she had trained for once, a long time ago, before everything changed, before she became invisible. "Move back, please," a security officer said as he guided staff away from the central area. Shani stepped aside without resistance, further from the helicopter, further from the problem, further from the choice. Near the aircraft, Kwame stood with two other technicians, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure about this calibration?" he asked, his voice low. "It was cleared this morning," one of them replied quickly. "Everything is within acceptable range." "Acceptable is not the same as precise," Kwame muttered. The second technician shrugged. "We don't have time to recheck everything. The demonstration is about to begin." Kwame hesitated, because something didn't feel right. He couldn't explain it fully, but he felt it, and that feeling refused to leave. Across the platform, Obinna watched everything unfold. From the outside it was perfect, exactly as planned, but his eyes caught something, a slight delay, a small hesitation among the technical team. It lasted only a second, but he saw it. "What's happening?" he asked quietly, turning to Ngozi. "Nothing, sir," she replied immediately. "Just routine checks." Obinna didn't respond, because he had learned something important over time. The most dangerous problems were the ones people dismissed too quickly. At the edge of the platform, Shani stood still, watching, listening, calculating. Her mind ran through possibilities. If they proceed as planned, minor instability during lift, compensated by the pilot, but under demonstration conditions. With pressure, with expectation, it could escalate. Not guaranteed, but possible, and possible was enough. Her chest rose slowly, then fell. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she did, the past returned again. Not as memory, as instinct. Her hands gripping invisible controls, her body adjusting to invisible movement, her mind anticipating what hadn't happened yet but would, if no one intervened. Her eyes opened. The present rushed back in. The noise, the crowd, the illusion, and the truth hiding beneath it. She looked toward the technicians again. They were still moving, still preparing, still unaware or unwilling to see. Her jaw tightened slightly, because she knew something else too. Even if she spoke, they might not listen. Because of who she was now, because of how she looked, because in this place, knowledge had a hierarchy, and hers ranked at the bottom. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced through the speakers, "we will now proceed with the live demonstration." Applause rose again. Controlled, confident, expected. The pilot stepped forward, adjusting his gloves, his posture steady. Everything was moving, forward, closer. Shani's heart did not race. She did not panic, because panic was useless. What she felt instead was pressure, the kind that built slowly, the kind that demanded a decision. Stay silent or step forward, but stepping forward meant risk, not just for the event, for her, for the life she had built from nothing, for the fragile balance she maintained every day. Because once she spoke, she could not go back to being invisible. And invisibility had protected her for a long time. Kwame stepped back from the aircraft, his eyes scanning once more. Then he saw her, at the edge, still, watching, not like the others, not casually, not curiously, intently, like she understood something he didn't. Their eyes met, just for a second, and in that second, he saw it. Certainty, not fear, not confusion. Certainty. Kwame turned fully toward her. "Hey!" He started taking a step in her direction, but before he could continue, a voice cut through. "Positions everyone," the moment broke. The connection lost. The process resumed. Shani looked away, because moments like that, they were dangerous. They pulled her back toward something she had tried to leave behind. The engine began to hum, low at first, then stronger. The blades remained still for a second longer. Then movement. Slow, controlled, expected. The crowd leaned in slightly. Phones lifted, cameras focused. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment that would define success or expose failure. Shani's eyes locked onto the helicopter. Every movement, every shift, every vibration. She could feel it now, not just see it. The imbalance, small but real. Her breath slowed again, her body tensed. Not with fear, with readiness. The kind that came from training, from repetition, from experience earned the hard way. Then, a slight adjustment, barely noticeable, but wrong. Her eyes narrowed. because that was where it would begin. "Everything looks fine," someone near the front said confidently. "Yes," another replied. "Perfect." Shani almost closed her eyes, because perfection was the most dangerous lie. Her fingers tightened, then loosened, then tightened again, because now it wasn't just a possibility. It was happening, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. And the question inside her, the one she had been avoiding, rose to the surface, clear, unavoidable. Would she stay silent and let them believe everything was fine? Or would she step forward and risk everything she had left? The helicopter blades spun faster. The air shifted. Dust lifted from the ground. The moment had arrived, and Shani, still standing at the edge of it all, knew one thing with absolute certainty. Silence was no longer safe. The helicopter blades gathered speed, slicing through the Lagos air with a growing, thunderous rhythm. Dust swirled across the helipad, brushing against polished shoes and expensive fabrics. Guests leaned back slightly, shielding their faces while still holding up their phones, eager to capture the moment. To them, it was spectacle. To Shani, it was calculation. Every rotation, every vibration, every shift in sound. She could feel it, building now, not dramatically, not yet. But enough to know that something was wrong. Her eyes locked onto the aircraft, her entire body still as if the world around her had faded into silence. The laughter, the applause, the music, it all blurred into nothing. Only the helicopter remained, and the truth it carried. "Clear the area," a security officer shouted, waving staff further back. Shani stepped behind the marked line, her grip tightening around the handle of her cleaning cart. This was it, the point of no return. The pilot, inside the cockpit, moved with confidence, adjusting controls, following procedure. From the outside, everything looked flawless. Because he didn't know. He couldn't see what she saw. He couldn't feel what she felt. And that was the danger. At the center of the platform, Obinna stood with his investors, his posture steady, his expression composed. "This," he said over the rising noise, "is the future of our expansion program." Heads nodded, eyes watched, reputations hung in the balance. And Obinna, though outwardly calm, felt the weight of it all pressing against him. Because this moment was not just about demonstration. It was about validation. About proving that he deserved the power he held. That he was not just his father's son, that he was enough. Near the aircraft, Kwame stepped back again, his eyes narrowing slightly. Something didn't feel right. Not enough to panic, but enough to question. He glanced toward the control indicators. Everything read within range. Everything appeared stable, and yet that feeling remained. He turned instinctively, looking, searching, and again he found her. Shani, standing at the edge, still, focused, unmoving, like someone watching a storm before it breaks. Kwame frowned, because now he was certain. She knew something. The helicopter lifted, slowly, gracefully. The crowd responded instantly. Applause, cheers, relief. Phones raised higher. To them, it was success. To Shani, it was the beginning. Her eyes tracked the ascent. Every inch, every second. And then, there it was. A shift, small, barely visible, but wrong. Her breath caught slightly, because she recognized it immediately. The imbalance, compensated, but not corrected. Her mind moved fast. If the pilot adjusts, it stabilizes temporarily, but under demonstration turns under pressure. It could worsen, not guaranteed, but dangerous. Her fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, from restraint, because she knew exactly what to do, exactly how to fix it, exactly how to prevent what might come next. But knowing was not enough. "Look at that," one guest exclaimed. "Perfect control, impressive." Another added, Very impressive. Obinna allowed himself a small nod. Yes, this was working. This was what he needed. This was... Then a slight dip. Not dramatic, not alarming, but noticeable. Just enough to shift the tone. The applause softened. Eyes narrowed. Something was off. Obinna's expression changed instantly. What was that? He asked sharply. Just wind adjustment, Ngozi replied quickly, though her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Obinna didn't respond, because his instincts told him otherwise. Inside the cockpit, the pilot adjusted the controls again, his movements precise but slightly more focused now. He felt it too. The subtle resistance, the slight delay in response. Nothing critical, but not perfect, and today, nothing less than perfect was acceptable. On the ground, Kwame stepped forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the aircraft. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath. One of the other technicians shook his head. "It's fine. It's within range." "Within range isn't enough," Kwame snapped quietly. But before he could move closer, a voice cut through the tension. Loud, clear, unexpected. "Stop the demonstration." The words sliced through the air sharper than the blades above. Everything froze. The crowd turned, confused, annoyed, shocked, because the voice did not belong. Shani stood just beyond the barrier line, her chest rising slightly, her eyes locked on the helicopter. Silence fell, heavy, uncomfortable, unbelieving. Ngozi's face hardened instantly. "What did you just say?" she demanded, stepping forward. Shani didn't look at her. "Stop the demonstration," she repeated, her voice steady now. "There's a misalignment in the system. It will get worse if you continue." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Disbelief, amusement, irritation. A cleaner, someone scoffed. "What does she know?" Obinna turned slowly. His gaze fell on her. And for a moment, he said nothing, because this was unexpected and inconvenient. "Remove her," Ngozi ordered sharply. 2 security officers stepped forward immediately. But Shani didn't move. "Please," she said louder now. "If you increase rotation under pressure, the imbalance will affect control stability. It's not safe." More murmurs, some laughter, some annoyance. The pilot above continued hovering, unaware of the exchange below. Obinna stepped forward, raising a hand slightly. "Wait." The guards paused. The crowd quieted. Because when Obinna spoke, people listened. He looked directly at Shani, taking her in fully now. Her uniform, her posture, her calm. Not fear, not desperation. "Calm, you're telling me," he said slowly, his voice carrying across the platform, "that you understand the mechanics of that aircraft better than my trained engineers." A few guests chuckled. The tone was clear, dismissive, controlled, dangerous. Shani met his gaze. "I'm telling you something is wrong," she replied. No hesitation, no apology, just truth. Obinna tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then, a faint smile touched his lips. Not warm, not kind, mocking. "All right," he said, turning slightly toward the crowd as if inviting them into the moment. "Let's make this interesting." The air shifted, the attention sharpened, because now this was no longer just a demonstration. It was entertainment. Obinna gestured toward the helicopter. "If you're so confident," he continued, his voice smooth, carrying easily, "why don't you show us?" A pause, a beat. Then he delivered the words that would change everything. "Fly this helicopter." The crowd leaned in. "And I'll marry you." Laughter exploded across the helipad. Loud, unrestrained, cruel. Phones turned toward her now, capturing, mocking, waiting. Ngozi smirked openly. Kwame stood frozen, and Shani did not laugh, did not speak, did not move, because in that moment, something inside her shifted. Not outwardly, but deeply. Because this wasn't just humiliation. This was a challenge, a line drawn between who she was and who the world believed she had become. The laughter continued. The noise grew. But inside, Shani, everything went quiet. Her eyes lifted slowly, from the ground to the helicopter, and the way she looked at it changed, because it was no longer something distant, no longer something forbidden. It was something she knew, something she understood, something that had once belonged to her. And for the first time, she did not look away. The laughter lingered in the air longer than it should have. It rolled across the helipad, in waves sharp, careless, and heavy with the kind of confidence that comes from believing there will be no consequences. Some guests leaned into each other, whispering jokes. Others openly raised their phones higher, zooming in on Shani as though she were part of the program. A spectacle. A moment to share. A humiliation to remember. At the center of it all, Obinna Okoye stood tall, one hand resting casually in his pocket, the faint trace of a smile still on his lips. He had not expected her to respond seriously. This was meant to be light-controlled, a demonstration of authority disguised as humor. And yet, something in the way she stood there did not match the reaction he expected, because Shani did not shrink. She did not lower her head. She did not break. Instead, she looked at the helicopter, not with fear, not with confusion, but with something far more unsettling: recognition. The laughter began to fade, not completely, but enough to leave space for something else to grow. Curiosity, suspicion, uncertainty. Kwame felt it first, standing near the edge of the technical team. His eyes moved between Shani and the aircraft. His mind replayed every small detail he had noticed over the past days: her quiet observation, her precision, her refusal to react like others. This wasn't normal. She wasn't normal. And now, for the first time, others were beginning to see it too. "Step back," Ngozi snapped again, her voice sharper, now tinged with irritation. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." But Shani did not look at her. Her attention remained fixed on the helicopter hovering above. The blades cut through the air with a steady rhythm. But beneath that rhythm there was something else. A strain. A resistance. Subtle, but growing. Shani took a step forward. Just one. And that single movement shifted the atmosphere more than all the laughter before it. "Stop the rotation, increase," she said, her voice calm but firm. "He's compensating too early." This time the silence came faster, because those words, they didn't sound like a guess. They sounded like knowledge. One of the technicians frowned. What did she just say? Kwame's eyes widened slightly, because he understood. Not everything, but enough. "She's right," he muttered under his breath. Ngozi turned sharply, but Kwame didn't answer, because now he was watching the helicopter differently. Not as part of the team, as someone searching for confirmation, and he found it. A slight overcorrection, exactly where she said it would be. His chest tightened, because that meant she wasn't guessing. Obinna's expression had changed. The smile was gone now, replaced by something quieter, something sharper. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Shani. "Who are you?" he asked, not loudly, but clearly enough to cut through the air. Shani didn't answer immediately, because the question was not simple. Not anymore. "I told you," she said finally. "There's a problem. That's not what I asked." His voice was firmer now, controlled, but pressing. Shani's eyes shifted for a brief moment, from him, back to the helicopter, because that mattered more. "The longer you keep it in that pattern," she said, ignoring his question, "the harder it will be to stabilize when he transitions." A murmur passed through the technical team, not mocking this time, concerned, because now they were watching it too, seeing it, feeling it. What pattern? One of them asked quickly. Kwame stepped forward. He's holding the compensation too long. It's going to affect the turn. Ngozi looked between them, confused. You're listening to her now. Kwame didn't respond, because the evidence was above them, and it was becoming harder to ignore. Inside the cockpit, the pilot adjusted again. His movements were still controlled, but more focused now, more deliberate, because something felt off. Not wrong enough to stop, but wrong enough to notice. He prepared for the next phase. The turn. On the ground, Shani's body tensed slightly, because she knew what would happen next. Not exactly, but enough. If he turns now, she started. But before she could finish, the helicopter shifted. The movement was smooth at first, expected, controlled, then a slight delay, a hesitation, barely visible, but real. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers, phones shaking slightly in uncertain hands. Obinna's jaw tightened. "What is happening?" he demanded. No one answered immediately, because no one had a simple answer anymore. Shani stepped forward again. This time no one stopped her, because something had changed. The authority in the air had shifted. Not completely, but enough. "Tell him to reduce the input," she said quickly. "He's overcompensating. It will push the imbalance further." Kwame turned to the communication officer immediately. "Relay that," he said. The man hesitated. "From her. Just relay it." The message went through. Up to the pilot. Inside the cockpit, the pilot frowned as the instruction came through. Reduce input. That didn't match his expectation, but something about the situation, something about the way the helicopter was responding, made him listen. He adjusted, slightly, carefully. On the ground, Shani watched every movement, her breathing steady, her mind focused, and slowly, very slowly, the instability eased. Not gone, but controlled, contained. The helicopter steadied. The tension in the air shifted again. From panic to disbelief, the crowd fell silent. Completely silent now, because what they had just witnessed did not make sense. A cleaner correcting a flight, in real time, in front of everyone. Obinna stood still, his eyes fixed on Shani. No arrogance now, no mockery, just something else, something unfamiliar. Because for the first time since the event began, he was no longer in control of the narrative. She was, and he didn't understand how. Shani didn't look at him. She didn't look at the crowd. She only looked at the helicopter. Until she was certain, until the movement was stable, until the danger, for now, had passed. Then, only then, did she step back, returning to the edge, to the place where she had always stood. Invisible, silent, forgotten, except. Now she wasn't, because every eye on that platform was watching her. Not with laughter, not with dismissal, but with a question that no one could answer. Who is she, and how does she know all this? The helicopter hovered steadily now, controlled, safe, but the demonstration, the perfect image, had already been broken, because something far more powerful had taken its place. Truth, and truth, once seen, could not be unseen. Obinna took a slow step forward. His voice, when it came, was quieter now, but heavier. "You said you could fix it," he said. A pause. "Then can you fly it?" The question landed differently this time. Not as a joke, not as a challenge, as something real. And Shani, for the first time since the laughter began, did not look away. The question hung in the air long after Obinna spoke it. "Can you fly it?" It was no longer a joke. No laughter followed. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the city itself was waiting for an answer. Shani stood still at the edge of the helipad, her eyes fixed on the helicopter hovering above. The machine was steady now, but not perfect, not truly safe, only controlled for the moment. She could feel it. The imbalance hadn't disappeared. It had only been managed. And she knew something else too. If they continued like this, relying on temporary adjustments, it would return, stronger, unpredictable. Her chest rose slowly as she drew in a breath. Behind her, whispers spread quietly through the crowd. She's just a cleaner. But she was right. How did she know that Kwame stepped closer, his voice low but urgent? Shani. She didn't turn. Is it safe? He asked. Shani's eyes remained on the helicopter. For now, she replied. For now. Kwame repeated, the weight of those words settling in. Because for now was never enough. Not in aviation, not in life. At the center, Obinna waited. He had asked the question, but now he felt the consequence of it. Because if she said yes, everything changed. If she said no, the doubt remained. Either way, control slipped further from his grasp. Answer me, he said more firmly this time. Shani finally turned. Her gaze met his, steady, unafraid, but not defiant. Just certain I can, she said. The words were simple, quiet, but they hit the crowd like a shock wave. A ripple of disbelief passed through the guests. No, that's impossible. She's lying. Ngozi let out a sharp laugh, stepping forward quickly. This is ridiculous. She's taking advantage of the situation. But Obinna didn't look at Ngozi. He was still watching Shani, studying her, because something about her answer did not feel like arrogance. It felt like truth. Prove it, Ngozi snapped. If you can fly, then do it, or stop wasting everyone's time. The challenge returned, but now it carried a different weight, because this time it wasn't built on mockery. It was built on uncertainty. Shani's heart did not race. Her hands did not shake. But something inside her, something buried for years, had begun to surface. Because this moment, this exact moment, was one she had imagined in silence more times than she could count. Not like this. Not in front of a crowd. But the feeling, the pull, the call back to something she had lost. It was the same. She looked toward the helicopter again. The sound of the blades, the movement of the air, the presence of the machine itself. It wasn't just an object to her. It was memory. It was identity. It was everything she had once been, before it was taken. Her fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. Because stepping forward now was not just about proving something. It meant reopening a door she had closed. A door that led back to pain, to loss, to everything she had survived. Shani, Kwame's voice again, closer now, softer. You don't have to do this. She glanced at him briefly, and in that glance he saw it. The conflict, the weight, the decision forming beneath the surface. I know, she said. And then she stepped forward. The movement was small, but it changed everything, because this time no one laughed. No one stopped her. No one spoke. They simply watched. As the cleaner walked toward the helicopter, Obinna's chest tightened slightly. He hadn't expected this, not really. He thought she might hesitate, back down, disappear again. But she didn't. And that unsettled him more than anything else. Because now he was no longer testing her. He was watching something unfold that he did not understand. Shani reached the base of the aircraft. The wind from the blades pressed against her uniform, pulling at the fabric, pushing her hair slightly loose. She didn't react. Her eyes moved over the structure instinctively, checking, measuring, confirming. Her hand lifted, then paused, hovering just inches from the surface. Because in that moment time shifted. The present faded, and the past returned. The cockpit door opening, her father's voice calling her forward. Come, Captain Adewale said, stepping aside. It's time. Her younger self hesitated. "I'm not ready," she admitted. He smiled gently. "You don't wait until you're ready. You learn by stepping forward." The sky stretched endlessly above them, bright, open, free. "Trust yourself," he said. Shani's eyes closed for just a second, then opened again. The helipad returned. The noise, the crowd, the pressure. But something inside her had shifted. Because this time, she didn't step back. Her hand moved forward and touched the helicopter. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Because that simple act, that quiet, deliberate act, made everything real. "She's actually doing it," someone whispered. "No, she can't." But she was. Kwame stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "If you're wrong," Shani didn't look at him. "I'm not," she said. "Not arrogance, not pride, just certainty." Obinna watched every second, his expression unreadable. But inside, something had begun to crack. Because for the first time, he wasn't the one deciding what happened next. Shani moved toward the cockpit. Each step measured, each breath controlled. The pilot inside looked down, confusion clear on his face as he received new instructions through his headset. "Hold position," the voice said. "Stand by." He hesitated, because none of this was standard. None of this made sense. But something in the tone, something in the urgency, made him comply. The helicopter stabilized again, waiting, hovering, suspended between doubt and truth. Shani reached the door, her hand lifted once more. And this time, she didn't hesitate, because the choice had already been made. Not by the crowd, not by Obinna, not by anyone else, but by her. She would not stay silent. Not anymore. Behind her, the crowd stood frozen, watching, waiting, holding their breath, because what was about to happen would change everything. And for the first time in years, Shani Adewale was no longer running from who she was. She was walking back toward it. The moment Shani's hand touched the helicopter, the world around her seemed to slow, not in the sharp, fragmented way of before, but in a deep, heavy stillness that pressed against every breath. The noise of the blades, the murmurs of the crowd, the tension in the air, all of it remained, but it no longer controlled her. For the first time in years, she was not reacting to life. She was stepping into it. The pilot inside the cockpit opened the door slightly, confusion written across his face. He had received unclear instructions, voices overlapping in his headset, none of them making complete sense. His eyes dropped to the woman standing below him, dressed in a cleaner's uniform, her expression calm in a way that did not match the chaos around them. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Shani looked up at him, her gaze steady. "Someone who knows what's wrong," she replied quietly, "and someone who can help you fix it." The pilot hesitated. Everything in his training told him this situation was abnormal, unacceptable even. But something deeper, something instinctive, made him pause. The aircraft beneath him was not responding the way it should. Subtle, yes, but enough to unsettle him. "What do you need?" he asked finally. "Hold your position. Don't increase input." "You're compensating too early," Shani said, her tone calm but precise. "I need to check the alignment." Behind her, the crowd stood frozen, watching a scene that had turned from entertainment into something far more serious. The laughter had disappeared completely, now replaced by a silence, filled with questions no one could answer. Obinna stood a few steps away, his eyes fixed on Shani. He could feel something shifting inside him, something he didn't yet fully understand. This was no longer about control or image, this was about truth. And truth had a way of exposing things people preferred to keep hidden. "Let her through," he said suddenly. Ngozi turned sharply. "Sir, this is highly inappropriate." She has no clearance. I said let her through. His voice was not raised, but it carried a weight that ended the argument instantly. Security stepped aside, and just like that, the invisible line that had separated Shani from the world of power disappeared. She stepped forward, not as a cleaner, not as someone beneath them, but as someone stepping into a space she understood. The wind from the blades pressed harder against her now, but she moved with careful precision, her eyes scanning the aircraft in a way that felt practiced, almost instinctive. She circled slightly, her gaze narrowing as she focused on the specific area she had noticed earlier. There, she said, pointing toward a section near the rotor assembly. The alignment is off. It's small, but it's affecting your response timing. Kwame moved closer, following her line of sight. His breath caught slightly as he saw it now clearly. How did we miss that? One of the technicians muttered under his breath. Shani didn't respond. She was already thinking ahead. You need to adjust before attempting any further maneuver, she continued. If you push it as it is, it will force a delayed correction. That's what you felt during the turn. Inside the cockpit, the pilot nodded slowly. Yes. There was a delay. It will get worse, Shani said simply. The clarity in her voice left no room for doubt. Obinna stepped closer now, his expression no longer guarded but searching. Where did you learn this? He asked. Shani didn't answer immediately, because the question carried more than curiosity. It carried history, and history was not something she could explain in a single moment. That's not important right now, she said finally. What matters is fixing the problem. Her response caught him off guard, because most people in that position would have tried to prove themselves, to impress, to claim recognition, but she didn't. She focused only on the aircraft, only on what needed to be done, and that said more than any explanation could. Kwame turned to the team quickly. We need to bring it down for adjustment. Now. One of the senior technicians hesitated. But the demonstration. Forget the demonstration. Kwame snapped, his voice sharper than before. We fix this first. There was a brief pause. Then reluctantly, the order was relayed. The pilot began a controlled descent. The crowd watched in silence as the helicopter slowly lowered, the excitement of moments ago now replaced by a quiet, uneasy awareness. Something had gone wrong, and it had taken a cleaner to reveal it. When the aircraft finally touched the ground, the tension did not disappear. It shifted into something heavier, more complex. Technicians moved quickly, surrounding the helicopter, checking the area Shani had identified. Within moments, their expressions confirmed what she had already known. She's right, one of them said quietly. The words spread faster than any announcement. She was right. Across the helipad, the weight of that realization settled deeply. Ngozi's face tightened, her earlier confidence, fading into something harder to mask. This doesn't change anything, she said under her breath, though no one was listening anymore, because attention had already moved to Shani. She stood slightly apart from the group, now her hands at her sides, her posture calm. There was no pride in her expression, no satisfaction, just a quiet stillness, as if this moment was not something she had been waiting for, but something she had simply accepted. Obinna approached her slowly. For the first time since the event began, there was no distance between them, no hierarchy, no performance, only a question that had grown too large to ignore. You knew all of this, he said, his voice quieter now. From the beginning. Shani met his gaze. Yes. Then why didn't you say anything earlier? The question carried more than curiosity. It carried frustration, confusion, and something else, something closer to realization. Shani held his gaze for a moment before answering. Because people like me are not heard, she said simply. Not until something goes wrong. Her words landed with a quiet force. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Obinna felt it, not as an attack, but as truth. And truth, when it arrived like that, left no space for defense. Around them, the event continued, but differently now. Conversations were quieter, movements more cautious. The perfect image had been broken, and in its place stood something far more real, flawed, uncertain, human. Kwame stepped closer, his expression filled with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "You could have saved us all this trouble earlier," he said gently. Shani shook her head slightly. Only if someone had been willing to listen. Silence followed, because again she was right, and this time no one laughed. No one dismissed her. No one looked away. They couldn't, because the woman they had ignored, underestimated, and humiliated had just saved them from a mistake they didn't even see coming. And for the first time that day, the question was no longer whether Shani could fly. It was something far deeper. Who had she been before the world forced her to become invisible? The helipad no longer felt like a stage. The polished image of perfection had cracked, and what remained was something far less controlled, something real. Conversations no longer flowed with effortless confidence. They paused, shifted, and lowered in tone, as if everyone present had suddenly become aware that what they had witnessed could not be undone. A cleaner had identified a technical fault that trained professionals had missed. A cleaner had corrected a situation that could have damaged not only the demonstration, but the reputation of an entire company. And now, that same cleaner stood quietly at the edge of the scene again, as if she had never stepped forward at all. But this time no one ignored her. Technicians continued working around the helicopter, carefully adjusting the alignment Shani had pointed out. Their earlier confidence had been replaced by a quiet humility, the kind that comes when certainty is proven wrong. Kwame remained close, observing everything with sharper focus than before. He no longer saw Shani as a mystery to be solved casually. He saw her as someone connected to something deeper, something that demanded understanding. "Where did you train?" he asked softly as he approached her again. Shani did not answer immediately. Her eyes were still on the aircraft, following the movements of the technicians as they corrected the issue. Only after a moment did she speak. "A long time ago," she said. Kwame studied her profile. "That's not something you forget." "No," she replied. "It's not." There was a quiet finality in her voice, one that suggested the conversation could go no further. At least not now. Across the helipad, Obinna stood in discussion with a group of investors. His tone remained composed, his posture controlled. But there was a difference now. He was no longer performing. He was responding. "We encountered a minor technical inconsistency," he explained calmly. "It has been identified and is being corrected. Safety remains our highest priority." The investors listened, some nodding, others exchanging glances that carried more weight than words. They were not concerned about the fault itself. Machines could fail. Systems could falter. What mattered was how a company responded. And what they had seen was unexpected. One of the investors, a middle-aged man from Accra, leaned slightly closer. "Your team did not identify the issue. First," he said, his tone neutral but precise. Obinna did not flinch. "No," he admitted. "And the woman who did, she works here." "Yes." The man paused briefly. "Interesting." That single word carried more meaning than a longer conversation could, because what had happened was not just a technical matter. It was a reflection of structure, of hierarchy, of who was allowed to be heard. Obinna felt that truth settle in his chest heavier than he expected. He turned his gaze again toward Shani. She stood apart, unchanged in posture, unchanged in expression. But nothing about her felt small anymore. Nothing about her felt invisible. The helicopter remained grounded as final adjustments were made. The demonstration had been paused but not cancelled. Too much was at stake to abandon it entirely. Yet the atmosphere had shifted. There was no longer excitement, only awareness, and beneath that awareness a quiet tension that refused to disappear. Ngozi stood near the edge of the platform, her arms crossed tightly. Her expression remained composed, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that had not been there before. "This is unnecessary," she said to one of the administrative staff beside her. "We are giving too much attention to something that should have been handled internally." The staff member hesitated. But she was right. Ngozi's jaw tightened. "That doesn't make this appropriate." Her gaze moved toward Shani, lingering there for a moment longer than necessary. Because what had happened was not just inconvenient. It was threatening. It disrupted the order she understood, the hierarchy she maintained. And people like Shani were not supposed to rise beyond their place. Meanwhile, Kwame had not stopped thinking. Every detail he had observed, every moment that had seemed insignificant before, now carried new meaning. The way Shani watched systems, the way she spoke with precision, the way she moved, not like someone unfamiliar with the environment, but like someone who had once belonged to it. There was only one conclusion that made sense. "She didn't just train," he murmured under his breath. "She was part of this world." He turned back toward her. "Shani," he said more firmly this time, "you didn't just learn this casually, did you?" She finally looked at him fully, and for the first time there was something visible in her expression. Not fear, not hesitation, but memory. "No," she said quietly. Kwame exhaled slowly. "Then what happened?" The question hung between them. Not intrusive, not demanding, but real, and for a moment it seemed as though she might answer. Her eyes shifted slightly, not away from him, but beyond him toward something only she could see. Then she spoke. "My father was a pilot," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. "Captain Adewale," she continued after a pause. "He trained me himself." Kwame's eyes widened slightly. Because the name, he recognized it, faintly, from somewhere. That name. He began slowly. "There was an incident years ago." Shani nodded once. "Yes." Silence followed, because now the space between past and present had begun to close. Kwame lowered his voice. "They said it was negligence." Shani's expression did not change. "They said a lot of things," she replied. "And you?" he asked carefully. "What do you say?" For a long moment she said nothing. "Then I say the truth was buried," she answered. The words settled heavily. Not dramatic, not loud, but filled with something deeper than anger. Something colder, something that had endured time. Kwame felt a chill move through him. Because now this was no longer just about skill or mystery. This was about injustice. Across the helipad, Obinna watched the interaction from a distance. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see enough. The way Shani stood, the way Kwame listened, the shift in posture, the quiet intensity of the moment. Something important was being said. Something that mattered, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he felt the need to understand it. Not as a CEO, not as someone responsible for the event, but as someone standing on the edge of a truth he had never questioned before. The technicians finally stepped back from the helicopter. "It's corrected," one of them announced. The words carried across the platform, restoring a sense of movement, but not the same as before. This time it was cautious, measured, aware. The demonstration would continue, but nothing about it would feel the same, because everyone present now knew perfection was not guaranteed. And sometimes the person who sees the truth first is the one no one chooses to listen to. Shani stepped back once more, returning to her place at the edge. But this time, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel small. Because something had changed, not in the world around her, but in how the world saw her, and perhaps more importantly, in how she saw herself. The air over the helipad felt different now, less like a performance, more like a test no one had prepared for. The technicians stepped back after completing the adjustment, their earlier certainty replaced by a quiet, professional caution. The helicopter stood ready again, but this time it no longer represented flawless control. It represented responsibility. Obinna stood near the center, his posture composed but his mind no longer steady in the way it had been at the start of the event. Too many things had shifted too quickly. Too many assumptions had been proven wrong. And at the center of it all stood a woman he had dismissed just moments earlier. He turned to the pilot, who had stepped out briefly during the final checks. "Is it stable now?" Obinna asked. The pilot nodded. "Yes. The correction was necessary. It should respond normally now," Obinna repeated quietly. The pilot met his gaze. "In aviation, nothing is absolute. But it's safe, safe." The word carried more weight now than it had before. Obinna nodded slowly, then turned to the crowd. "We will proceed." He announced, his voice steady, though the confidence behind it had changed. It was no longer built on certainty, it was built on trust. Trust in the system, yes, but also, whether he admitted it or not, trust in the woman who had seen what others had missed. As the guests repositioned themselves, their movements more reserved than before. Shani remained where she was, just beyond the main circle of attention. But her distance no longer erased her presence. People glanced toward her now, not openly, but enough to acknowledge that she was no longer just part of the background. Kwame approached her again, his expression thoughtful. "They're going to fly it," he said. Shani nodded slightly. "Are you sure it's stable?" he asked. Shani's eyes returned to the aircraft. "It's better," she said. "The risk has been reduced." Kwame exhaled slowly. "That's not the same as gone." "No," Shani replied. "It isn't." There was no fear in her tone, only clarity, and that clarity unsettled him more than panic would have. "Then why are you so calm?" he asked. Shani didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed, her mind already moving ahead, calculating, observing, anticipating. "Because panic doesn't help," she said finally. "Only preparation does." Kwame studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Because at this point he had learned something important. When Shani spoke, she did not guess. She knew. The pilot climbed back into the cockpit. The engine restarted, the familiar hum building once again. This time, however, every movement was watched more closely, not just by the technicians, but by the guests as well. The earlier confidence had been replaced by awareness. The blades began to turn, slowly at first, then faster. The air shifted again, carrying with it a different kind of tension. Not anticipation, but vigilance. Shani's body remained still, but her focus sharpened. Her eyes tracked the motion, her mind aligning with the rhythm of the machine. This time the response was cleaner, more precise. The correction had worked, but she did not relax, because she knew something others did not. Correction was not the same as resolution, and systems that had once failed could fail again. The helicopter lifted, smoothly, controlled. The crowd watched in silence. No applause this time, no laughter, just observation. The aircraft rose higher, holding steady, its movements deliberate. The pilot maintained a careful balance, his earlier confidence replaced by focused attention. Inside the cockpit, his hands moved with precision, but his mind remained alert. He could feel the difference now. The instability was gone, but the memory of it lingered in his awareness. He prepared for the next maneuver. a controlled turn. Below, Shani's posture changed almost imperceptibly. Her shoulders tightened, her breath slowed. Because this was the moment that would reveal everything. "Wait," she murmured softly. Kwame, standing nearby, turned instantly. "What is it?" Shani didn't answer right away. Her eyes remained locked on the aircraft. "Watch the response," she said. The helicopter began its turn. At first, everything appeared normal, smooth, balanced, expected. Then a slight hesitation, so small it could have been dismissed. But Shani saw it, felt it. Her voice rose louder this time. "He's compensating again. Tell him to ease the input gradually, don't force the turn." Kwame didn't hesitate. Relay that he shouted to the communication officer. The message was sent immediately. Inside the cockpit, the pilot adjusted, carefully, deliberately, and this time the movement held. The turn completed without disruption. The aircraft stabilized. A breath, collective silence, was released across the helipad. The tension eased, but it did not disappear, because now everyone understood something they hadn't before. The difference between control and illusion. When the helicopter descended and touched the ground once more, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of realization, full of questions, full of something no one had expected to feel that day: respect. Not for the machine, not for the company, but for the woman who had guided them through something they did not even understand themselves. Shani stepped back again, her role instinctively returning to the edges. But this time the space around her felt different. It was no longer defined by dismissal. It was defined by attention. Obinna approached her slowly. There was no audience now, no performance, just a conversation that needed to happen. "You didn't just fix a mistake," he said quietly. "You prevented something worse." Shani didn't respond immediately, because she understood what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. "You trusted me," she said instead. Obinna paused, because that was not the response he expected. Not at first, he admitted. "But I do now." Shani met his gaze. "And before today?" she asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Obinna held her eyes for a moment before answering. "Before today, I didn't see you," he said. The honesty in his voice surprised even him. Shani nodded slightly. "That's the problem," she replied. No accusation, no anger, just truth. And once again, he had no defense against it. Behind them, the event continued, but not in the way it had been planned. Conversations shifted toward what had happened rather than what had been presented. The demonstration had succeeded, but not in the way anyone expected. Because the most important thing revealed that day was not the capability of a machine, but the consequence of ignoring a voice. Kwame stood a short distance away, watching the interaction with quiet understanding. Everything made sense now, not completely, but enough, and he knew one thing for certain: Shani's story did not begin here, and it would not end here either. As the sun began to lower slightly in the sky, casting longer shadows across the helipad, the energy of the day softened. But beneath that calm, something had been set in motion, something deeper than a single event. Because truth, once revealed, does not return to silence. And for Shani Adewale, the past she had buried was no longer willing to stay hidden. By late afternoon, the helipad had emptied of spectacle, but not of consequence. The tents were still standing, the glassware still arranged, the security still in place, but the atmosphere had shifted from display to aftermath. Conversations no longer circled around investment figures or expansion plans. They circled around one name: Shani. Staff gathered in small clusters, speaking in low tones that carried more weight than the laughter from earlier. Some replayed what they had seen, trying to understand it. Others spoke with the quiet certainty of people who had already decided their version of the truth. "She trained somewhere important," one technician said. She must have another replied. No one learns like that by chance, and yet she's been cleaning floors here for months. The sentence trailed off unfinished because the answer was uncomfortable. Across the platform, media personnel who had been invited to capture a successful demonstration now found themselves chasing a different story. Cameras were no longer focused on the helicopter. They turned subtly but steadily toward the woman who had changed the course of the day. Shani noticed. Of course she noticed, but she did not move toward them. She stepped away instead, returning to the quieter side of the building where the noise softened and the attention faded. It would have been easier to disappear again, to slip back into the role she had played for so long. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. Because the moment she stepped forward, something she had buried for years had begun to rise. And now, no matter how far she walked, she could feel it following her. Not as fear, as truth. Kwame found her near the service corridor, standing by a window that overlooked the lower part of the compound. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply watched her, trying to understand how someone could carry so much and reveal so little. They're asking questions, he said finally. Shani didn't turn. They should. Kwame stepped closer. The media, too. That was always going to happen. Her voice was calm, almost detached, but not indifferent. There was awareness in it, acceptance of something she had already prepared herself for. Kwame studied her profile. You knew this would come back to you. Shani's eyes remained fixed outside. I knew it might. And you still stepped forward. Yes. There was no hesitation in her answer. Kwame exhaled slowly. Most people would have stayed quiet. Shani's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but something close to it. Most people haven't lived with what I've lived with. The weight of that statement settled between them. Kwame nodded once. Tell me, he said gently. Not everything. Just enough to understand. This time Shani did turn. Not fully. Just enough to meet his eyes. You already know part of it, she said. My father. Kwame nodded. Captain Adewale, she continued. He believed in doing things the right way, even when it cost him. Her voice remained steady, but something deeper moved beneath it. There was a contract, she went on. Maintenance approvals, inspections that were signed without being completed properly. He refused to approve them. Kwame's brow tightened. That would have made enemies. It did, Shani said simply. She looked away again, her gaze returning to the quiet space beyond the window. They said he was difficult, she continued, that he didn't understand how things worked, that he was standing in the way of progress. And you? Kwame asked. I believed him, she replied. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only certainty. What happened? Kwame asked quietly. Shani's fingers tightened slightly at her side. They found a way to remove him, she said. Kwame's chest tightened. You mean? I mean they buried the truth. She said, her voice still calm but colder now. They turned it into negligence. A mistake. Something easier to accept. Kwame stared at her, the pieces falling into place. And your training? He asked. Ended, she said. No school would take me after that. No company would trust me. His name became a warning. Silence followed, because there was nothing simple about what she had just said. Nothing easy to respond to. You've been carrying this all this time, Kwame said finally. Shani nodded once. Yes. At the center of the compound, Obinna stood alone for a moment, watching the last of the guests prepare to leave. The event had not failed, but it had not succeeded in the way he had planned either. And for the first time in a long time, he was not thinking about reputation. He was thinking about truth. The conversation with the investor from Accra still echoed in his mind. The subtle question, the quiet observation, the implication beneath it. Your team did not identify the issue first. The words had not been accusatory, but they had been clear. Something in the structure of his company, something in the way it functioned, had allowed a critical voice to be ignored. And that voice had come from someone he had not even seen. He turned his gaze toward the far side of the building, toward where Shani had disappeared, and, for reasons he could no longer ignore, he knew he needed to find her. When he reached the service corridor, he saw her standing by the window, Kwame beside her. He slowed his steps slightly, not wanting to interrupt but knowing he had to. Shani. Her name felt unfamiliar in his voice, not because it was difficult to say, but because it carried meaning now. Both she and Kwame turned. Kwame stepped back instinctively, sensing that this was not his moment. "I'll be nearby," he said quietly, leaving them alone. Obinna approached slowly. There was no arrogance in his posture now, no performance, only intention. "I need to understand," he said. Shani looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Understand what?" she asked. "Everything," he replied. "What happened today, what you said, your father." The last word landed differently. Because now, he was not asking as a CEO. He was asking as someone stepping into a truth he had never questioned before. Shani held his gaze for a moment. Then she spoke. "My father tried to stop something wrong," she said, "and it cost him everything." Obinna's chest tightened slightly. "Was my company involved?" he asked. The question was quiet, but it carried weight. Shani didn't answer immediately, because this was where everything became complicated. Her eyes searched his face briefly, not for weakness, for truth. "I don't know how much you know," she said finally, "but the people who buried what happened were not small." Obinna felt the words settle heavily, because he understood what she meant. Connections, influence, power, the kind of power that protected itself. "Then we find out," he said. The certainty in his voice surprised even him. Shani studied him carefully. Why, she asked. The question was direct, uncomfortable, necessary. Obinna didn't look away. "Because if what you're saying is true," he said, "then something has been wrong for a long time. And I've been standing on it without knowing." Shani's expression shifted slightly. Not into trust, not yet, but into something closer to consideration. "This won't be simple," she said. "I know," Obinna replied, "and it won't be clean. I know that too." A brief silence passed between them. Then for the first time, Shani said quietly, "You're listening." Obinna nodded. For the first time he admitted, "I am." As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow across the building, the day finally began to settle. But beneath that calm, something had begun. Not a resolution, not yet, but a direction. Because the truth Shani carried was no longer hers alone. And once it began to surface, it would not stop. Not until it was seen. Not until it was heard. Not until justice found its way back. By evening, the glow of the helipad lights had replaced the harsh brightness of the afternoon sun. What remained of the event looked orderly on the surface staff, moving with purpose, equipment being secured, vehicles arriving and leaving. But beneath that order lay a quiet storm that had not yet broken. Inside the main building, the executive floor was no longer filled with polished conversations and rehearsed confidence. Instead, it carried a tension that could not be hidden behind glass walls or measured voices. Doors closed more firmly. Calls were made more urgently. And for the first time in a long time, Obinna Okoye was not directing the flow of information, he was chasing it. He stood at the head of a long conference table, a folder open in front of him, its contents scattered with report signatures and archived documents that had not been reviewed in years. Around him, a small group of senior staff sat in silence, waiting for him to speak. "This file," Obinna said slowly, tapping the page with controlled precision, "contains the investigation report on Captain Adewale." No one responded, because the name itself had already shifted the atmosphere in the room. "I want to understand something," Obinna continued. "Who approved the final conclusion?" Ngozi, seated to his right, straightened slightly. "It was processed through standard channels," she said. "At the time, the conclusion was clear pilot error resulting from negligence." Obinna lifted his eyes to meet hers. "Was it?" he asked. Ngozi held his gaze, but there was a flicker, just a flicker of uncertainty beneath her composure. "That was the official finding," she replied carefully. Obinna leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "Official findings can be influenced." The room fell silent, because everyone understood what that meant. He closed the folder slowly. "I want every document related to that case. Not summaries, not conclusions. Everything." Ngozi's fingers tightened slightly against the table. "That may take time." "Then take it," Obinna said. "But don't take too long." There was no anger in his voice, but there was something stronger. Resolve. Across the building, Shani sat alone in a quiet staff room, the noise of the day finally fading into distance. For the first time since morning, there was nothing demanding her attention, nothing requiring her to act. And yet her mind refused to rest. Because the moment she had stepped forward, the past had followed her back into the present. Not in fragments anymore, not in distant echoes, fully, clearly, unavoidable. Her hands rested on the table in front of her, still but not relaxed. She stared at them for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the life they had lived with the one they had once known. A soft knock broke the silence. She didn't respond immediately. The door opened anyway. Obinna stepped inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because this space, this quiet, unguarded space, felt different from the helipad, from the crowd, from everything that had come before. "I thought you might be here," he said finally. Shani didn't ask how he knew. Some things didn't need explanation. "What do you want?" she asked. The question was not defensive, just direct. Obinna took a step closer, then stopped, respecting the distance between them. "I've started reviewing the records," he said. "Your father's case." Shani's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted slightly, and she asked. "There are gaps," he replied. "Missing details, reports that don't align." Shani looked away briefly, her gaze settling somewhere beyond the walls. "I told you," she said quietly. "The truth was buried." Obinna nodded. "And I intend to find it." The certainty in his voice was no longer unfamiliar. But trust was something else entirely. "You don't know what you're stepping into," Shani said. Obinna held her gaze. "Then tell me." A long silence followed, because this was the moment where words would move from implication to reality. Shani exhaled slowly. "They didn't just destroy his career," she said. "They made sure no one would question it." Obinna listened, his attention unwavering. He found inconsistencies in maintenance approvals. She continued. Aircraft cleared without proper inspection. Documents signed before checks were completed. Obinna's jaw tightened. "That would put lives at risk," he said. "Yes," Shani replied. "And profits at risk too, which is why they couldn't allow him to expose it." "Who are they?" Obinna asked. Shani's eyes met his again. "People with influence," she said. "People connected to contracts approvals, and companies like this one." The implication was clear, and it landed heavily. Obinna felt it not as accusation, but as possibility. "Are you saying my father was involved?" he asked quietly. The question hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Shani didn't answer immediately. Because this was not something she had ever said out loud. Not like this, not to someone like him. I'm saying, she said carefully, that your father's company was part of the system that protected them. Obinna's chest tightened, not in anger, in realization. Because he knew his father's legacy as success, as achievement, as something to uphold. But legacy was not always clean. He turned away for a moment, his mind moving through memories he had never questioned before. Decisions made without explanation. Partnerships accepted without doubt. Structures built on trust that had never been tested. And now everything felt different. I didn't know, he said finally. Shani's voice remained calm. Most people don't. That doesn't make it right. No, she agreed. It doesn't. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been, because there was no easy way forward, no simple solution. Only truth. And truth demanded something in return. Outside, the night deepened. The building quieted as staff began to leave their conversations, carrying into the parking lot, into cars, into homes where the events of the day would be retold in different versions. But inside that small room, the story was only beginning. Obinna turned back to Shani. If we bring this out, he said, it will affect everything. I know. The company. My name. My family. I know. He held her gaze. And you, Shani, didn't look away. I lost everything already, she said. There's nothing left for them to take. The words were not bitter. They were final, and in that finality, Obinna understood something he hadn't before. This was not just about justice. It was about restoration, about giving back something that had been taken without right. I'm not walking away from this, he said. Shani studied him carefully, measuring, weighing, not his words, his intention. Then don't, she replied. Simple, direct, but it carried something more. Not trust, not yet, but acceptance of a shared path. In the days to come, nothing would remain hidden. Documents would surface, names would be revealed, and the structure that had protected the truth for years would begin to crack. But in that moment, in that quiet room, the most important decision had already been made. They would not stay silent, and once that choice was made, everything else would follow. In the weeks that followed, silence did not return to Okoye air. Instead, it was replaced by something far more powerful: exposure. What had begun as a single moment on a helipad slowly unfolded into a chain of revelations that no one in the company could ignore. At first it was quiet. Internal reviews, documents being requested, old files reopened. But truth, once disturbed, rarely stays contained. It spreads, and this time it spread beyond the walls of the company. The investigation into Captain Attawale's case revealed inconsistencies that could no longer be dismissed as oversight. Signatures appeared on reports that had never been properly completed. Inspection logs were altered. Approvals had been rushed under pressure, tied to contracts that demanded speed over safety. Names began to surface. Some expected, some not. And among them were individuals whose influence had protected the system for years. Obinna stood at the center of it all, no longer as a figure maintaining control, but as someone dismantling the very structure he had inherited. It was not easy. Every step forward came with resistance, legal warnings, internal opposition, and quiet attempts to redirect the narrative. But he did not stop, because for the first time he understood what leadership truly meant. Not protecting power, but correcting it. For Shani, the process felt different, less like action, more like reckoning. Each document uncovered was not just evidence, it was memory. Each name mentioned was a reminder of what had been taken, of the years she had spent rebuilding a life from nothing, while the truth remained hidden. She did not attend every meeting. She did not stand at the center of every discussion. But her presence was constant, steady, unavoidable. Because without her, none of this would have begun. Kwame worked closely with the investigative team, his technical expertise, now paired with a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer saw his work as routine maintenance. He saw it as responsibility. We missed things before he admitted during one meeting. Not because we didn't know, but because we didn't question enough. His words carried through the room, settling into the minds of those who had once relied on assumptions rather than awareness. Change had begun. Not just in structure, in mindset. Outside the company, the story gained momentum. Media outlets picked it up quickly. What started as a story about a disrupted demonstration became something far larger. A case of buried truth, corporate oversight, and a young woman who had been silenced by a system that refused to listen. Shani's name appeared in headlines. At first, she resisted the attention, because attention had never protected her. It had only exposed her to judgment. But this time it was different. This time the story was not being written about her. It was being told with her, and slowly, carefully she allowed her voice to be heard. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. "My father did his job," she said during a quiet interview. "He chose truth over convenience. That choice cost him everything, but it shouldn't have erased him." The words reached people. Not because they were emotional, but because they were real. The legal process took time. Cases like this always did. But evidence has its own rhythm, and once enough of it gathers, it becomes impossible to ignore. Those responsible for the falsified reports and suppressed findings were called to answer. Some denied, some deflected, some attempted to shift blame. But the structure that had protected them was no longer intact. Because Obinna had made a decision early on, there would be no protection for wrongdoing, not even if it touched his own family's legacy. The investigation eventually confirmed what Shani had always known. Captain Adewale had not been negligent. He had been right. And for the first time in years, his name was spoken, not as a warning, but as a man who had stood for something that mattered. The day the final report was released, Shani did not celebrate. She stood quietly at a small memorial site near the airfield, where her father had once worked the wind moving gently around her, as she looked out toward the open sky. Kwame stood a few steps behind her, giving her space. Obinna arrived shortly after, his presence quieter than it had ever been before. No security, no announcement, just a man who had come to witness the result of a truth he had chosen to follow. "He was cleared," Obinna said softly. Shani nodded. "I know." There was no relief in her voice, not because it didn't matter, but because some losses could not be undone. Justice could restore a name, but it could not return time. It could not bring back moments lost. It could not erase years of silence. But it could do something else. It could acknowledge. It could correct. And sometimes that was enough. "Thank you," Obinna said after a moment. Shani turned to him. "For what?" she asked. "For not staying silent," he replied. Shani held his gaze briefly. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I know." There was no offense in his response, only understanding. Life did not transform overnight. There was no sudden shift into something perfect. But real change, had begun. Shani was offered a position within the company. Not as a gesture, not as charity, but as recognition of what she had always been capable of. She did not accept immediately, because this place had once been a space where she was unseen, and stepping into it again required more than opportunity. It required trust. Time passed, and slowly, carefully, she stepped forward once more. Not as the person she had been forced to become, but as the person she had always been. Auntie Zainab's health improved with proper care, her strength returning little by little. Tariq continued his studies, his future, no longer uncertain in the way it once had been. And Shani, for the first time in years, allowed herself to look at the sky without turning away. Obinna changed too, not in appearance, not in status, But in understanding, he no longer led from distance. He listened, he questioned, he built something different from what he had inherited. Because leadership, he had learned, was not about maintaining power. It was about earning it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Shani stood near the airfield once more, the quiet hum of aircraft in the distance, no longer something she avoided. Obinna joined her. Neither spoke for a while. There was no need. "You never answered my question," he said eventually. Shani glanced at him. "Which one?" He smiled faintly. "About flying." Shani looked out toward the sky again. Then after a moment she said, "Some things are not about proving you can." He waited. "They're about choosing when it matters," she finished. Obinna nodded slowly, because now he understood. And somewhere above them a plane moved steadily across the evening sky. Balanced, controlled, free. Just as it was always meant to be. Some of the strongest people in the world are not the ones standing at the top, surrounded by recognition and applause. They are the ones who have been overlooked, underestimated, and pushed aside, yet still carry truth, quietly, within them. Shani's story reminds us of something we often forget. Silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it means survival, but when the moment comes to speak, when the truth can no longer be hidden, that voice can change everything. We also learn that power, when left unchecked, can bury even the most important truths. But it only takes one person, one moment of courage, to begin uncovering what has been lost. Justice may not come quickly. It may not come easily. But when it does, it restores more than facts. It restores dignity. So, never be too quick to judge someone by where they stand today. You don't know the battles they've fought, the truths they carry, or the strength it took for them to survive. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us of what truly matters.